What's up, guys? Welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks, and today we're doing a deck tech on Gyrus, Waker of Corpses. What I like about this guy is he has an early, mid, and late game presence. Early game, you're reanimating those secure Tribe Elders, ramping yourself to the moon. Mid game, let's be honest, you're sacrificing him to something like a Greater Good or Ruthless Technomancer. And late game, you're casting him for at least 6 power, so you can reanimate those bombs, such as your Craterhoof Behemoths and your Avenger of Zendikars, so you can take out your opponents. Now, I think this guy is underrated and honestly thrown to the wayside because of that exile clause. People are mad they can't reanimate something over and over and over again, but I'll argue you don't need to do that if we fill our graveyard thick enough. Am I right? This is a 100 card format. Let's go ahead and throw 50 cards into our graveyard. That way we always have a choice to reanimate something with Gyrus. Additionally, let's double down on this and throw Food Chain in this deck. Yes, this is a Gyrus Food Chain deck, and the value we can generate off of that is insane. Additionally, we run cards like Hogak. That way we can just exile 8 cards from our library and cast a free 8/8. Well, I guess 2 of those will have to be a creature so you can get the colored pips, but you know what I mean. We're going to generate a ton of value with this guy. We're going to sack a lot of big giant creatures, and we're going to do a lot of damage doing it. So if that sounds like a deck tech you're into, let's get into it. The first thing we need to focus on is filling our graveyard. We can use Satyr Wayfinder and Blanchwood Prowler for this. What I like about these two options, early game especially, is it gives you your lands into your hand. That way, you know, you're not screwing yourself on land drops early game, which is, you know, kind of important. World Shaper is another solid option because it's really good early game and really good late game. You know, early game mills you a little bit. Late game brings all your lands to the battlefield, and there's a couple ways we can use that to win. Altar of Dementia, I really like this one as well, right? We run Hogak, our commander's really big. We can sacrifice both those guys and mill a lot of cards. Dragon Mage and Magus of the Will. While these two aren't technically discard outlets, they will fill your graveyard because you can use these both multiple times, right? Every combat we're attacking and dealing combat damage with Dragon Mage, we're drawing 7 and discarding our hand. That gets crazy really fast. Magus of the Will is another card. We can use this guy multiple times. Just keep reanimating him to draw 7 and discard your hand, and that graveyard's gonna get filled pretty fast. Doom Whisperer. I'm gonna be honest, and I don't say this lightly, this guy has Grizzlebrand vibes, right? You just keep paying life and you just keep throwing cards in the graveyard, and eventually once you have the cards you need, you can just win the game. Auric Lore Mage and Entomb are also really solid cards in the deck because you can just throw whatever you want into the graveyard. Whatever you need, these cards can make it happen. Buried Alive is a little more strict because you can only use it on creatures, but it lets you throw 3 creatures into the graveyard. This card's busted in the deck. Moving on, this next category and our previous category kind of go hand in hand. This next category is going to focus on discarding the creatures from our hand into the graveyard, right? Sometimes you got a creature in your hand and you need it in your graveyard, so these cards are going to let us do that. Chainer Nightmare Adept. This one's perfect in the deck. We can discard what we don't need to cast what we need from the graveyard. Additionally, that second ability to give your creatures haste, if it wasn't cast from our hand, doesn't only work with the cards you used with Chainer, right? If we cast Hogak from the graveyard, you've got an 8/8 with Trample. Fauna Shaman, possibly our best discard outlet, right? We discard a creature we don't need and want in our graveyard for any creature in our library. Pretty broken. Faithless Looting, this one's perfect early game, and it can even sit in our graveyard for late game whenever we draw something that we need to put into our graveyard. Jaxus, this girl is insane in the deck. Not only does she replace the card we discard, so it's kind of like card replacement, just like Fauna Shaman, but she's also going to double up on all of our ETBs we run in the deck, or on combat damage, like Dragon Mage. Greater Good. This is one of the most insane cards in the deck and what I believe to be one of the most powerful green cards in general. Like I said, Hogak, a big piece of this deck, as well as our commander. Cast them for a bunch, draw a lot of cards, and then you can discard exactly what you want into your graveyard. I've even used this card on 1/1s just to discard something from my hand. Additionally, it will draw you a card, so it's pretty useful card selection that way. Now, we filled our graveyard. Let's talk about how we get that stuff out of our graveyard, right? Because we're not going to want to exile everything with Gyrus. Shijiki. This is one of my favorite cards in the opener. This guy is his own engine. Not only is he ramp, not only does he mill you, but you can go ahead and use him to get any key pieces he threw into the graveyard to get back to your hand from the graveyard. This guy does everything you need. Conduit of Worlds. I've been in love with this card ever since it's been printed. It honestly feels amazing to play with. Not only does it let you play land cards from your graveyard just for free, if you need something that you've discarded, it's gonna let you play artifacts, enchantments, creatures, planeswalkers, any permanent you can think of that you've discarded and you need, this card is gonna let you play it. Additionally, the drawback to only cast one spell if we do that is not gonna be crazy, since our commander is basically just gonna negate that effect because we're still gonna be exiling stuff from the graveyard and recurring them with Gyrus. We also play Ancient Green Warden and Titania, Protector of Argoth. Ancient Green Warden's going to go ahead and double up on those landfall effects while letting us play lands from our graveyard, and Titania's just going to throw a land from our graveyard right to the battlefield, effectively being ramp, plus she can create a massive board state in this deck, which is just a massive benefit. These three cards are really going to start wearing down that barrier between hand and graveyard. Ruthless Technomancer is an all-star in the deck. Sacrificing Hogak to this guy feels amazing, just getting 8 treasure tokens, and then you can even use those treasure tokens to reanimate stuff from the graveyard. Feldon of the Third Path, another solid include here, because we can go ahead and just reanimate anything from our graveyard for 3 mana. Pretty crazy. Phyrexian Delver, another card that synergizes really well with our commander. As long as our commander has 4 power, we attack, we get a Phyrexian Delver, and then out of nowhere, Craterhoof Behemoth or Omnath Locus of Rage is just on the battlefield now. Enjoy that! Lastly, we have Eternal Witness, the all-star for getting permanents from your graveyard to your hand. Additionally, a super solid target for Gyrus, right? I mean, she will get exiled after that, but we're not trying to do something super degenerate with her anyway. We are also running a Life from the Loam package. This package tears apart the barrier between hand and graveyard completely, making your graveyard your hand. Let me explain why. Life from the Loam lets you target 3 lands from your graveyard and put them into your hand, and then you dredge, mill 3 cards, you know, right? What absolutely breaks this card is the Kamigawa lands. Takanuma and Boseiju Who Endures. We can go ahead and mill our library, returning creatures from our graveyard to our hand. Additionally, Boseiju Who Endures is just going to start removing everybody's shit. Memorial to Folly and Bala Ged Recovery, slower options, but we're still getting stuff we need back from our graveyard. Finally, we have Agadeem's Awakening and Shatter Skull Smashing. Now we have more recursion and more removal. So essentially, Life from the Loam is completely breaking these cards, giving us repeatable removal, repeatable recursion, and our opponents are just going to concede to the value. And remember, while we're doing all this, we're milling ourselves to oblivion, giving us more Gyrus triggers. The deck is just going to start performing at a completely different level. Let's take this moment to talk about why I included Food Chain in the deck, because I think to say I included it just because Squeeze in the deck and we can create infinite mana that way is extremely disingenuous. I included Food Chain in this deck because this is a high risk, high reward strategy, and Food Chain fits in that category perfectly. Let me just throw out a scenario for you. Turn 2, Satyr Wayfinder, we go ahead and mill the cards, get the lands, whatever. Turn 3, Food Chain. Turn 4, sacrifice Satyr Wayfinder to Food Chain. Now you have 3 mana, you tap the 4 lands, and now you've got an Omnath Locus of Rage on turn 4. That's insane value, and that's exactly what we're trying to do with this deck. And then you can go ahead and sack or exile the Omnath Locus of Rage tokens to add more mana to your mana pool to cast more spells. Remember, tokens do net you 1 mana with this card, something I think a lot of people either ignore or forget. It's amazing in token strategies, and this deck has insane potential to create a lot of tokens, and that's why it's in here. Moving on, we obviously include Squee. That way we do have options for infinite mana, and Squee's just useful to recur, sack, you know, sometimes you need something to sacrifice, and Squee, he's the man. He's always there to be, you know, the first one to raise his hand. Let's talk about the core of the deck. We run Anger. This is the first card you're pitching into the graveyard, giving everything you have haste. It's incredibly useful, and your opponents are going to sigh whenever they see that hit the bin. Ghoulcaller, Gisa, and Hogak. I want to talk about these two at the same time because they're just broken together. You can cast Hogak from your graveyard and then sacrifice Hogak to Ghoulcaller Gisa to create 8 tapped zombies. Then you can tap those 8 zombies to cast Hogak from your graveyard again. Notably, if we have a Warstorm Surge or a Terror of the Peaks on the battlefield, that's a total of 32 damage we just did to somebody or something. Hogak is honestly just one of the best cards in the deck. Whether you're sacrificing him to a Ruthless Technomancer to create 8 treasure tokens, or you're gonna go ahead and sacrifice him to a Disciple of Bolas to draw 8 cards. The value this guy creates is insane, and honestly, he's a perfect addition to the deck, especially while we're just exiling a ton of cards from our graveyard just to throw an 8/8 onto the battlefield for free. We are also running Parallel Lives. I like Parallel Lives here because not only does it essentially double up on the ETBs we're going to get whenever we reanimate something with Gyrus, because Gyrus creates a token copy of that creature, we're going to get 2 token copies of that creature. Pretty cool. Additionally, cards like Ghoulcaller Gisa, Ruthless Technomancer, we're creating treasure tokens, we're creating zombie tokens. It just works really well in the deck and kind of just breaks it. Speaking of cards that work with Parallel Lives, we have Omnath, Locust of Rage, and Avenger of Zendikar. These are both 2 really, contenders for ending the game. Just the amount of lands we can play with this deck makes this guy a threat, and honestly, Avenger of Zendikar paired with our next card, Craterhoof Behemoth, is another game ender. Now, we kind of do want to play Avenger of Zendikar and Craterhoof Behemoth on the same turn, so we're not telegraphing anything. That's where Seize the Day comes in, right? The amazing part about this card is you can cast it from your graveyard. So we can go ahead and get 2 combat steps, that way we get 2 Gyrus triggers. The first Gyrus trigger is going to target Avenger of Zendikar, and the second Gyrus trigger is going to target Craterhoof Behemoth. Now, notably, you will need Anger in your graveyard, so those little plant tokens can attack on the second combat step. Now, you've officially killed your opponents and won the game out of nowhere. Lastly, we play Yahenni Undying Partisan, just for a consistent sack outlet. Why I like this guy over some other sack outlets is pretty simple. In this deck specifically, we want to be able to sacrifice bigger creatures for bigger value, and Yahenni grows. That's the beginning and end of my reasoning. Additionally, if we give this guy Indestructible right before a board wipe, he's going to get massive, and we're going to have a big beater to sacrifice to Greater Good or Ruthless Technomancer to grow back really fast and really jumpstart us back into the game. Moving on, let's talk about the ramp in the deck. We run Secura Tribuilder and Dawn Treader Elk. These ones are really solid early game, that way we can sacrifice them, get our lands onto the battlefield, then cast Gyrus, reanimate them, sacrifice them again, right? We're ramping really fast. We also run Dryad of Illusion Grove, Exploration, and Oracle of Moldiah. I like these cards in the deck because we have the ability to play lands from our graveyard, and we are also playing a bunch of sack lands because we have cards that benefit off of landfalls, off of sacrificing lands, and off of sacrificing permanents in general. So now not only are we ramping, we're just synergizing really good with the deck. Selvala, Heart of the Wild, is an insane card in the deck because not only can it generate a ton of mana because we are playing massive creatures, it can also draw your whole deck in a scenario where we can create infinite mana, right? Because we can go ahead and create infinite red mana with Squee, and then go ahead and create infinite black and infinite green mana as well with Squee, right? Now we can cast our commander as many times as we want for however big we want our commander to be, and now we can draw our entire deck using Selvala, Heart of the Wild's second ability to draw a card if you play the creature with the biggest power. We also run Rakdos, Lord of Riots. Why? Because I want to make Gyrus big. That's the only reason this guy's in the deck. Yes, he lowers the cost of your Hogax and stuff like that as well, but honestly, I just like the fact that we can cast Gyrus for an insane number using this guy. We also include all 4 signets. The reasoning is simple. We want to cast our commander on turn 3 for 4 mana. That way we can go ahead and bring stuff like your Merciless Executioners and your Fleshbag Marauders back from the graveyard to slow our opponents down. Just the mental game of that Fleshbag Marauder sitting in the graveyard and them knowing we can attack with Gyrus at any point, reanimating it, is going to slow their whole game plan down because they're not going to play their mana dorks, they're not going to play their impactful creatures, they're not even going to play their commander unless they want to force the situation. This is going to go ahead and let you make your most efficient plays while they have to make suboptimal plays. Since we're already on the topic, let's move on to removal. We have Plague Crafter, Fleshbag Marauder, and Merciless Executioner. As I stated earlier, these cards are just really efficient to throw themselves into the graveyard and sit there ready to be reanimated by Gyrus. It's going to slow our opponents down and it's going to mess with their head, which is the important part. Massacre Worm, a token strategy's worst nightmare. I've seen this card actually kill players because they've gone so wide and they're just waiting to untap. Well, they're not going to untap because Massacre Worm just killed them. Bane of Progress absolutely hoses any artifact or enchantment strategy. I've seen people literally give up the game after they see this guy enter the battlefield. They have to start from square one with all of their pieces in their graveyard. Reclamation Sage is just a solid reanimate target that's going to get rid of any pesky, artifact or enchantment. Sarkhan's Unsealing essentially turns our commander into a board wipe. We can cast him for 7 mana, basically wiping the board completely. We can do that additional times just because of the way this deck produces mana. Additionally, it's just added value whenever a 4, 5, 6 power creature enters the battlefield. We get 4 damage to point anywhere. That can get rid of a plethora of creatures in, Commander. Finally, we obviously include Warstorm Surge and Terror of the Peaks. These cards are insane in the deck just because of the amount of creatures we're going to be producing with the deck. This category might seem a little low, but don't forget the broken stuff we're doing with our lands that are essentially just removal spells. Moving on to card draw, we have Elemental Bond and Gyrus Uprising. These cards are especially good whenever we have a Omnath Locus of Rage or Titania Protector of Argoth on the battlefield, because essentially every time we play a land, we're going to draw a card. It really gets us rifling through our deck pretty quickly. Additionally, Gyrus Uprising does give us Trample. The Gitrog monster. This guy pairs insanely well with Titania Protector of Argoth. Now we're getting a 5/5, we're drawing cards, it's insane value. Additionally, when you throw Korvold into that mix, now we're sacrificing our lands, drawing cards, we're playing additional lands, and Korvold's just getting massive. The reason I included Korvold in this deck is honestly because of his attack trigger, right? We attack with Gyrus, reanimating something from our graveyard, and then we attack with Korvold, sacrificing that creature. Now we've netted a card, and Korvold's gotten bigger. Additionally, like I said, we do run sack lands, so running Korvold with sack lands is just amazing. I don't want you to think, oh, it's a Jund deck, I threw Korvold in there. No, this guy synergizes really well with the deck, and honestly, he just enables us to start rifling through our graveyard. The Great Hinge, another amazing card in the deck, because honestly, we're never paying anything over 2 mana for this. Additionally, it is card draw and ramp. Disciple of Bolas and Shadowheart. Now, Disciple of Bolas is a solid target for Gyrus, while Shadowheart is a more permanent card, sticks onto the battlefield, and her goal is honestly just sacrifice anything we reanimate with Gyrus to get some value off of it. Alright guys, that's going to do it for the deck tech. I'm sorry this one kind of ran a little longer, but I love Gyrus and I love the intricacies of this deck. He's my favorite commander, so I wanted to give him some extra love and spend some extra time on him because honestly, like I said, he's underrated and I think people need to give this guy a shot. I'd really appreciate some feedback on this one. What do you think of the deck? What do you think the deck's power level is at? And honestly, if I sold you on Gyrus Waker of Corpses or not. But for now, guys, that's all. I hope this helped you in your deck building endeavors, and I'll see you in the next one.